Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the mind's eye, an auditorium of audacity. I'm your host, DJ BJ Turnoff, representing Stitcher Radio and Z-Talk Radio. We're continuing our trek toward Halloween with another exploration into the creepy side of North America. Andrea Lankford, retired National Park Ranger, returns as our beacon, our light through the darkness of the forest. Andrea is stopping by to share some paranormal tales about America's most eerie national parks that she collected along the way from other park rangers, historians, and found within government documents. She's also going to report on some long-forgotten unsolved mysteries, the information that she uncovered about these deaths, and on some mysterious disappearances that she's currently working on, most of which is featured in her book, Haunted Hikes. So whether you're listening by the light in your tent or curled up in the dark underneath your blanket, stay tuned for some spine-tingling tales. The Mind's Eye returns shortly. Paranormal events, unsolved mysteries, curses, history. You're going to hear it all in just a few minutes, but while you wait, you might as well read an article that wraps all of these things up in a nice little candy-wrapped bow. We just posted a pretty interesting article about attempts by Scottish authorities to reunite an accused witch's body with her missing head, ushered on by the 315th anniversary of her death. In 1852, the body of Lilias Addy, the only interred witch in all of Scotland for centuries, was dug up by some locals who wanted to study the skull of a witch. That same skull was then exhibited in 1938, only to go missing shortly afterwards and never to be seen again. Get the details on how you can help at themindseyemedia.com, themindseyemedia.com. Also, big shout out to the deceased man. Hopefully you're listening from the other side right now. Big shout out for getting the last laughed at your own funeral. See the morbidly hilarious video right now on our Facebook and Twitter pages at Mind's Eye Show, at Mind's Eye Show. We'll be right back with retired park ranger Andrea Lankford spooking up a supernatural storm in a Mind's Eye moment. We absolutely love it when we got past guests on for a second go round, and almost a year to the day. Former park ranger Andrea Lankford stops at the Mind's Eye Lodge again. Hello. How is everything going over there? Love to speak to you again.
If you don't mind, I poured myself a hard cider in honor of Halloween. And I'm going to have that because we're going to be telling some pretty scary stories tonight.
All right. Well, I think all our listeners should go out there and match it if they probably haven't already, quite frankly, among our listeners over here. So, and that's why we love them. So let's. So what we're doing tonight on this episode, we're bringing back Andrea's book, Haunted Hikes, Spine-Tingling Tales and Trails from North America's National Parks. We're bringing that back from the dead, published all the way back in 2006, still available on Amazon, FYI. And in it, I'm going to quote Andrea here, National Park Rangers aren't prone to superstition. You come from a science background. You're an admitted skeptic. Why did you even write a book of such a nature?
Well, like you said, park rangers are very practical, down-to-earth people. Most have a scientific background like myself, but they would still see and hear things that they couldn't explain. And, rangers, when we're off duty, were hanging around the campfire sharing stories, and inevitably a story like some of the ones I'm going to tell you tonight would come out. And I was just fascinated to hear them. It was a part of park history that I didn't feel was well documented at the time. So I decided to do some research and find out how many of these stories were out there and which parks that they seem to come from.
A lot of the stories do come from national park rangers, so a lot of those comprise of the witnesses for your stories, right?
Yeah, I spoke to historians for the Park Service, law enforcement rangers, some of who are good friends of mine that I respect. Interpreters, these are the naturalists that tell the cultural and scientific stories in the park. They go way back. Even the first park ranger in Yosemite heard a ghost at Grouse Lake, and that goes back to the 1800s with Galen Clark.
What I found particularly interesting is that these witnesses, I mean, they're, like you said, they're park historians, they're rangers. These are highly credible people. So to me, they really give a lot of substance to the stories that you tell. But That's individually speaking. As a whole, what is the national park system's official stance on the paranormal?
I don't know if they have like a written protocol about this, but national park public information officers like to stick with facts. And I did get a little pushback from a few parks when I was doing my research that one PIO, public information officer, told me that she could not comment in any way about any of the stories that occurred in her park. And that surprised me because every legend, there's a facts around every legend. I mean, she wouldn't even debunk the stories. Very tight-lipped about it.
Did you find that to be a lot of the case, or really you found the rangers and the parks itself to be somewhat embracing, particularly because you were a former ranger?
Most had a common sense approach to it. The parks, it's part of the park's cultural history, these legends and folk tales. Some of the stories in my book are unsolved mysteries, so they're factual, just unsolved. So most rangers were cool about it, yes.
Oh, you park rangers and your common sense, that's why we love you so much. And really, that's why there's so much weight to a lot of the stories and the chapters you do have, because, like we said, they were rangers.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit just about the thought process behind the layout of the book, because that's pretty cool. And then the fright factor rating system, which is a lot of fun.
So there are over 50 hikes in the book, and I divide them by region and by park. So I picked some of the parks that had the most compelling stories. And each hike, I give a skull rating that goes from 1 to 4. And one skull, I say that would make 7-year-olds giggle. 2 skulls would give you chills. And 3 skulls are very disturbing, but clowns are scarier. And the worst, the 4 skull hikes, those are the ones that gave me nightmares, and I'd rather not talk about it.
Well, I guess on that note, I think I have to make you talk about one. Give us an example of a 4 icon story that you don't really want to talk about, but I'm going to force you to.
Yeah, well, being a former search and rescue ranger, unfortunately, I have recovered more bodies than I can count from the national parks. And so the hikes where there are actual deaths associated are the ones that scare me the most. And in Yosemite, that 4 skull hike is Bridal Veil Falls. The Native Americans in Yosemite call Bridal Veil Pohono Falls. Pohono means evil wind. And they told stories that Pohono you would be at the top of the waterfall and you would just be entranced and hypnotized by the beauty. You'd walk into the water toward the edge, and then the wind would push you off the waterfall to your death. The very disturbing part is almost every year, despite all the warning signs, people are killed exactly that way in Yosemite National Park.
Why? I mean, we talked about that one last year, and it seems like Yosemite has a bit of a dark history with the Native American history in itself. I think in one of the stories you had, you talked about the last Native American leaving Yosemite. I mean, that's scream-worthy in itself and has nothing to do with the paranormal, really.
Yeah, you're exactly right. In 1851, the Mariposa Battalion came to Yosemite, and Native Americans told the whites that to them the Yosemite Valley was a valley of death and evil spirits. And sure enough, there are numerous legends, very disturbing Native American legends associated with that park. Eventually, the whites had conflict with the Native Americans living there at the time, and one of them was Chief Tenaya, and he was known to be a very scary dude, very powerful, strong guy. And eventually, the Mariposa Battalion killed his son, and he was obviously very upset, and he was ousted from Yosemite. Before he left, though, he issued a curse to all the whites in Yosemite. And he said that he would be in the winds and you would feel him and grow cold. Now, interesting enough, in Yosemite, the canyon named after him, Tenaya Canyon, is sort of a Bermuda Triangle type place. Lots of people get in trouble there. People have drowned, broken their legs, got lost. Helicopter pilot got vertigo and nearly crashed there. It's a place with a lot of bad juju in Tenaya Canyon. So that you could say that Chief Tenaya has cursed Yosemite.
I guess there was a positive version of that curse when I think there was a criminal who tried doing the failed kidnapping of a ranger, and the curse of Tenaya got them.
Yeah, that actually was a happy ending. In 1995, a outlaw named Phil Lunn took a campground ranger hostage with a stun gun, and he kidnapped her, and he made her drive him up to a remote area of the park. They went out into the wilderness, and he tried to handcuff her, and she was very brave and strong and fought him off. It was a very brutal fight. She broke her finger in the process, but was able to run away and notify the law enforcement rangers. So from there, Phil Lund takes off into the wilderness, and sure enough, he gets sucked down into Tenaya Canyon, and on the way down, he gets trapped between two waterfalls. He can't go up, and he can't go down. He ends up spending 12 days there with nothing but muddy water to drink. And finally, a climber goes up the opposite way, sees him, recognizes the face from the wanted posters, and park rangers come and arrest him. And as I write in my book, he was probably glad to be arrested at that point.
You know, it reminds me of another part of our conversation from the Ranger Confidential interview that rangers are 10 times more likely to get assaulted on the job and 12 times more likely to die on the job than, I think, an FBI agent.
Yes, a park ranger is definitely more likely to die on the job than an FBI agent.
Yeah, a lot of people think, that your job is easy and you're just kind of going on hikes all the time. But, just knowing from our conversations, it's quite the opposite. And it is a extremely dangerous job and a perilous job and one that is, every bit a hero as other policing forces as well. So, again, kudos, and, my hat's off to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I appreciate that a lot.
And just sticking with some of the deaths and that happen in the parks, how many people do die in national parks per year?
It's a good question. I don't know if the stats are strong enough for me to give you a good number, but it would easily be in the dozens. One year when I was in Grand Canyon, 22 people died just in that park alone. There's probably at least one murder in the national parks every year.
Do the national parks have some type of master list of the deaths and the murders and disappearances that happen, or is that not really tracked on a macro level?
For what we know no, it's not tracked very well. You've got hundreds of national parks all across the nation, and there's not a real good central system where anybody could just look at that and go, oh, that many people died this year and there were that many rescues. And people have complained, they don't keep good national statistics on missing persons in the national parks. So we have to guess, unfortunately. But it's more than people suspect. I mean, criminals go on vacation too. There are dangers in the parks, unfortunately.
I'd like to hope that they keep a master list of sorts. I mean, I can understand why they wouldn't give the information out to rangers or to the people, because that would scare off a large financial revenues for a lot of the states and for the federal government. So I completely understand that, but I hope to think they do keep track of that on some level. But I guess not.
I think in the individual parks they do, but I do believe maybe the motivation on a national scale isn't there, and perhaps what you mentioned is one of the reasons.
It kind of reminds me of when when there weren't that many databases for police for each police in each state and in each precinct, and it's really hard to catch repeated criminals because they would just go to another state and there'd be no information on them. It kind of reminds me of that on some level.
You're absolutely right. That's a big problem, and it needs to be solved. You're absolutely right on that.
Another thing that I know you've been trying to solve is you've been working on a few missing persons cases last time we talked, and I think you had a few of them: Chris Silva, David Sullivan, Chris Fowler, and any updates on any of those, and just remind the audience on some of them. Maybe let's start with Chris Silva.
Yeah, I'm still working on a book about the missing hikers on the Pacific Crest Trail, and unfortunately, the 3 remain missing, but not for shortage or lack of trying. There's some very dedicated groups of people trying to find all 3 of them, and they're still looking. They're very determined, and they haven't quite given up yet. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to find them, so they're still missing. There were three white males between the ages of 24 and 35, and they went missing each 1 year in a row, 2015, 2016, 2017.
Do you think that they're connected at all because they were on the same trail?
I don't believe so. I looked at that just in case. I hate to rule it out completely, but I believe weather is a major factor in two of the cases. The Chris Sylvia case is very perplexing because the weather was mild when he went missing. But we turned up a lot of weird leads and sightings. They're all three very mysterious cases.
And if somebody has some information about any of them, what would be the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, the group of people that are searching for them, we have a website. It's pctmissing.org. And so if you go to that website, you can contact us through that.
What's the most unexplainable disappearance that you've read about or experienced in a national park?
Well, I'll tell you the vanishing that scares me the most, and it happened in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. In 1976, there was a federal employee for the State Department. He traveled internationally. His name was William Bishop. And apparently he murdered 5 people in his home, and it was his mother, his wife, and his 3 children. Blood covered the walls, is what they found when they went to his house. Either he or someone else drove their bodies to North Carolina and burned them in a pit, and then drove the family station wagon into Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And that was the last trace of William Bishop. In the station wagon, rangers found an axe with blood on it and blood-soaked blankets and a shotgun, and people had seen him hiking in the park. But that's it. No body, no sighting. Someone thought they might have saw him in Italy. But so I think that's why that vanishing scares me. Is he still alive and out there?
What do you think happened to him? Do you think he hit the run, or did he just start living in the parks? I mean, there are people who do that.
Yeah, I hope, if he killed his family, I hope he went into the park and committed suicide. If he didn't kill his family, though, perhaps he took a new identity to escape whoever did kill his family.
Let's switch gears a little bit and just have, I guess, we've talked a lot about deaths and missing people, and let's take a break there. When we come back, it'll be a little bit of a breath of fresh air and let people absorb some of that information. And if anybody knows of any information about Chris Silva, David Sullivan, or any of the missing persons cases that Andrew is working on, make sure you reach out to her. Let's just take a quick break. The Mind's Eye will return in a moment. We're back on The Mind's Eye with retired park ranger Andrea Lankford talking about her books, Haunted Hikes, Spine-Tingling Tales, and Trails from North America's National Parks. Before we jump right back into a few more stories from the book, I want to get into a little bit more about you. Did something ever happen to you on the job that unexplainable, or maybe a UFO or a ghost, anything like that?
Well, one time I came upon a weird shrine in the woods, and there was an animal sacrifice, it looked like there, and weird incense and stuff burned. That was one thing I found that I've never fully explained. I did visit a friend, the chief ranger at Stones River Battlefield in Tennessee, and while I was there, I heard what I thought was cannon fire at night. But when I went to talk to my friend to see if he heard it, he didn't hear anything. And that sort of disturbed me, because if it had been a backfire of a car or whatever, it was so loud, he would have heard it.
And I've had similar stories like that from Gettysburg. It's one that's personally happened to me, but people that I'm familiar with and have been there with. One of which is a is currently a police officer. He had that pretty much that same exact story, but in Gettysburg. Have you been Gettysburg?
I have been to Gettysburg. Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I am a skeptic, so I feel like these things are tricks of the mind, and because these parks, there's such a violent, bloody history that perhaps it affects our subconscious, and it's like a metaphor, and we hear or see weird things.
Outside of Gettysburg, which I know a lot of people consider to be the most haunted, you've described Mammoth as maybe being the second most haunted. Why is that?
Mammoth Cave?
Yeah, Mammoth Cave. Excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah, there's over 150 documented unexplained paranormal events in Mammoth Cave. One reason might be it's been a tourist attraction for a very long time, like before 1830. People have been coming and visiting Mammoth Cave, and then it's a cave. It's dark. It tends to inspire such things. One of the odd things about Mammoth Cave is a doctor bought it in 1839, and along with the cave, he acquired slaves. Back at that time, black men were guides in the cave, and one of them that was most famous was Stephen Bishop. And while Stephen Bishop was very respected, knowledgeable guide, while he was doing that, the doctor was creating a tuberculosis hospital in the cave. He had this strange idea that being in the cave would cure TB. It did not. It failed. People died there. And there's even a pillar of stone that they call Corpse Rock, because they would bring the TB patients on and set them down on the rock after they died. Rangers now guide people through the cave, and they like to do this thing they call blackouts. And you're going through the cave and you see the lights to see where you're going. And they get everybody to stand still, and then they shut off the light so it's pitch dark black. And many rangers have reported weird things happening during blackouts. They've been shoved, they've heard footsteps, turned around, no one was there, been pushed or hearing whispers. So it's a spooky spot, Mammoth Cave.
And is that what's in Kentucky?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because it's funny because I went there a long time ago, never even heard of those stories at all. I think it was in 2014, and it kind of reminds me of how some individual parks seem to embrace it on some level, kind of like Gettysburg, and then some other parks really don't even talk about it at all. Which national parks did you notice really embrace the weirder side of their history?
Yeah, well, I think Joshua Tree definitely does. Joshua trees are funky, Dr. Seuss looking trees. They have a geological feature called Skull Rock, and it looks just like Homer Simpson's skull. There's a canyon called Hall of Horrors that rock climbers go to. So Joshua Tree definitely embraces its weirdness. Another is Crater Lake. I had a ranger tell me she refers to it as a ghost and goblin park. There were two twin rangers, Lloyd and Larry Smith. They're retired now, but those two guys maintained something I call the Twin Report, but they documented all the weird things that had ever happened in Crater Lake National Park, and it's quite fascinating to read.
Where do they document that? Because I was at Crater Lake last year, absolutely one of my favorite national parks, and I don't recall hearing any stories.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Hopefully it's still online. They used to do a great job with it. They're older now. So yeah, I bet they have that in the park. What do they call them? The archives. I bet in the archives they have their report somewhere.
Wow, geez. It's funny that you bring up Joshua Tree, because this kind of always sums up my experiences with paranormal phenomenon. I was there one time. I was doing some podcast work for Contact in the Desert, which is considered one of the biggest UFO conferences in the world. And I was camping out there, and just staring at the stars all night, and it was phenomenal. And turns out that same night, about 500 feet away from me, which I didn't know and didn't see, that there was a huge rash of UFOs seen by about like 200 people. Of course, I didn't see it. I was still enjoying the stars, but I would say that kind of sums up all my experiences with the UFO, with paranormal phenomenon. There, but not quite there at the same time. So, or maybe that's just a metaphor for my life. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if you're into UFOs, you should go to Great Sand Dunes in Colorado. Have you been there?
I have not. Tell me about
Yeah.
it.
Well, the big sand dunes. Now, going way back to the 1950s, people have seen UFOs there. You know, weird red cigar-shaped things, black triangles, you name it. About every UFO shape you could think of. And then in 1967, they had the famous horse mutilation. There was a horse that was dead out just outside the park. The intestines were ripped out, the brain was gone. There was a strange tool by the horse, and then these circular indentations in the ground. It was a big deal back in the day. And also, people hear booming sounds. People have heard like weird rumblings and shakes, and they've often seen a white government-looking van in the area at the time. But there is one explanation for that, and that's the avalanching sand will create weird booming. Sometimes they call it singing sand.
Just sticking with UFOs, what's the freakiest one from the book Haunted Hikes?
Probably that one. The horse mutilation is pretty freaky, but I'm also a fan of Brown Mountain Lights in Blue Ridge Parkway. You can see from Blue Ridge Parkway. That's another very popular UFO spotting site. Lights, weird lights, and they also in the mountains and also in the sky. There's even, if you search online, you'll even see photographs recently of UFOs that they can't identify.
And not to self-promote here, but we did do an episode on that about, I think, a year ago as well, so check that out. But first, you have to check out Andrea Lankford's book, Haunted Hikes, since we are talking about that tonight. Yeah, that is weird. How do you explain all the mutilations?
Well, there's sort of some conflicting stories. Like I believe one veterinarian theorized that the horse had a, what do you call it, an infection in its rear of its body, and that someone had put it out of its misery, and it was just decay and scavengers that had ate the internal organs. But then they said in the autopsy of the horse, whoever conducted the autopsy had to cut into the skull and then discovered that the brain was gone. So to that I read that the brain just vanished without a prior cut in the skull. So it's bizarre. And the woman who that horse belonged to ended up committing suicide.
Huh. Did she leave a reason why?
No, because there was a lot of media attention on this at the time. It was actually a pretty big deal, and maybe it's just the whole thing was too much stress on her.
Yeah, I'm not going to get conspiratorial on that. So as much as I want to, that's pretty terrible.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, a lot of times UFOs and mutilations, whether it's horse or cow, they're attributed to aliens. What do you think about aliens? Do they exist?
I'm not sure if we've been visited by aliens, but, as big as the universe is, I think there's a higher probability that alien life exists versus that it doesn't. That's my theory.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you. I kind of take, I guess a scientific prism. It seems if space is really truly infinite, then it would be, almost a mathematical, impossibility for there not to be some type of intelligent life out there. So
exactly.
And let's just continue with that notion. I want to play a quick fire round with you just on your paranormal beliefs, and I have a pretty good feeling I know what all these answers are going to be. But what do you think? Do ghosts exist?
No.
No. What about Bigfoot?
No.
Chupacabra?
No.
What am I forgetting here? What's the weird stuff I'm forgetting? Anything?
Skunk ape. No.
I don't even know where to begin with that one, quite frankly. Yeah.
He's one of my favorites. I don't believe he exists, but I still love him.
Well, tell me about that one. What's that one again?
Well, he lives in Big Cypress National Preserve, and he smells like vomit mixed with rotten fish.
Oh, sexy.
And he has an uncanny ability to be seen and visit areas without leaving behind any convincing forensic evidence.
Oh, that sounds like a superhero in itself. Actually, I wouldn't mind
Yeah,
having that power.
yeah. One wildlife official said if there was an animal that smart, then we need to capture him and make him run for Congress.
Hey, you already got my vote, so and no
Skunk
competition.
Ape 2020.
Hey, I'll take it. I feel like we already have a couple of real freaks out there already, so I'll gladly take it. And yeah, let's not get political here, or or should we? How can we? Who do you think Chupacabra would vote for? Who do you?
Probably Kamala Harris.
I like it. And we'll stop there, guys. Actually, let's cut the politics BS here. For nobody wants to listen to it anyway, so let's be serious. But let's get serious. I remember in the book you describe that each national. You say that each national park has a spiritual side. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, every park has a personality for sure. And when you live and work in a park, you really start to feel it viscerally. And parks have, some are show offs like Yosemite, and some are quieter like Everglades. But they all have a dark side too. They're all the moods can change so quickly on you. So as much as you can go into a park and it can feel like your church, with the beauty, it can also feel scary. And so I think that's what I mean when I say parks are soulful and spiritual.
What was the scariest part of your job?
Unfortunately, that was dealing with death and helping people deal with tragedies when their loved one died. Quite frankly, that was the scariest part of my job.
I thought you would have said the bureaucracy of everything.
Well, that's a close second.
And I guess that's a whole nother episode in itself.
Yeah.
But what about when you were younger? Did anything ever happen to you, unexplainable, looking back now?
No, I can't really think of anything. I didn't get, well, when I was really young, like, I don't know, 5, I thought I saw a skeleton in the shower when I went to go to the bathroom at night. And I went and woke up my mom and dad and said I saw a skeleton in the shower. Of course, they came in there and opened the curtain and there was nothing there.
Oh, well, that's very reassuring to say the least. Good Lord, who knows what that thing is? The shadow person, Let's talk a little bit more about some of the paranormal. I guess some of the other things on the paranormal spectrum that we haven't touched on. Give me either a Bigfoot or a chupacabra story.
Well, chupacabra. You said, do you believe in chupacabra? Well, not literally, but could there be some sort of weird hybrid animal out there that people are calling chupacabra? Maybe, because in Big Thicket in Texas. Back around 2004 time period, people were finding a bunch of hairless blue creatures with a rat tail and a big overbite with fangs, and they were eating people's chickens. Eventually someone shot one, and so they had a picture of it, and it was bizarre. One wildlife biologist was reportedly freaked out when he saw the picture. The experts said it was a fox or a coyote with severe case of mange, but ranchers weren't satisfied. They said it didn't look like any fox or coyote they've ever seen.
And looking at the pictures, what's your opinion?
It does look like it could be a fox with mange, but it is bizarre. There's a picture in my book, and you can find some online. It's still just weird. It looks like something's seriously wrong with it.
What about Bigfoot? I imagine there's a lot of Bigfoot stories, in national parks.
Yeah, probably Skunk Ape is probably my number one favorite Bigfoot. The second would be the sex-starved female Bigfoot at Olympic. There were some stories in National Enquirer, one of those magazines, that male campers were being sexually harassed by this amorous female Bigfoot.
Oh, do you have her number by any chance? Or yeah, my love life's a little rough right now.
Well, I've
I'll
got
take what
another,
I can get. So
yeah, well, there's another one. There's a Native American ghost in Great Smoky Mountains who apparently lost her lover, and she hangs around Molly's Ridge, and she tends to haunt only men.
there's a lot of those stories. The white woman, or the wailing woman, or the woman haunting men. I mean, I believe that there's where I'm from originally, Long Island, Lake Ronkonkoma. There was a lady of the lake, but she would, and it was a Native American mythology I think dealt with, but she would only take men because she was either a scorned lover or missing the her lover who died or something. Like there's a lot of those stories out there.
Yeah, it's kind of a common theme. I don't think if I know of a ghost yet that only haunts women.
Well, I think the regular men are doing that just fine right now. So I no need.
Good point.
Yeah, right. And that's a sad point in itself.
Yeah, it is.
Last time we talked about just sticking with the Native American aspect of it. Last time we talked about how a lot of the Native American legends, they seem to closely match some of the geological formations of the area. For example, Grand Canyon. All those layers. You can look into our last interview with listeners to hear about it. But have you noticed a similar pattern when it comes at least to paranormal stories, how they do match the history of the area?
It's actually very common. Like I said, there's always some facts around a legend or a folklore or a haunting. There are a few that appear to be made up out of thin air, but more often than not, there's a history behind the story. Absolutely.
Give us an example, one that you found truly fascinating.
Well, and this is mostly in Canada, but also in Isle Royale in Michigan, the national park there. And that's stories of the Wendigo. Some of you might be familiar with a Wendigo. It's a weird, scary spirit that haunts deep, deep wilderness. And when people get lost and in trouble, it infects their soul and turns them into cannibals. And there's been very real stories. In 1778, there's a report from trappers of this actually happening to a trapper, and he just converted and became a cannibal, ate his friends. It was horrible. He ended up having to be executed to get him to stop. But here's the thing, so that's true right there. And psychiatrists actually have a diagnosis they call Wendigo psychosis, where someone believes they're a cannibal. So those Native Americans of the Wendigo the legends go way back, but there is truth to the problem. So it's a dark warning within the legend.
Which national park has the most documentation of the weird, the supernatural, paranormal?
Probably Mammoth Cave, as I told you, with 150. But another one would probably be Harper's Ferry, but that's the part where the PIO said we do not document or comment on any of these stories.
Well, now you got to tell us that story, particularly because that's in Maryland, where I'm based now.
Yeah, Harper's Ferry is just got a really rough history. And, I'll start in 1859, and that's where John Brown, the abolitionist, very good motives to end slavery, but very foolish tactics and suicidal tactics. And he led a raid on Harper's Ferry. And unfortunately, the first person his raid killed was a freed black man. Also, his son was killed in the raid, and he was eventually hung for that. Then after that, there's the Civil War. It was, went back and forth, I think 23 times or something like that. A lot of bloodshed in the streets there. There was a flood in 1870 that killed 42 people. It became a park in 1944. And since then, people have seen phantom armies. They see unexplained fires on the hillsides where the soldiers used to camp. Some people say John Brown paces on the floor of a farmhouse, where he was when he was planning his raid. One of the more humorous stories is in 1974, there was this bearded guy that was tall and he looked like John Brown and was hanging around the park, and people called him John B. Well, one day, this was before smartphones, the family got their photo taken with John B. Then they went home and developed the film, and he wasn't there in the photo. Historians also really spooky stories. There's dormitories in the historic buildings there. They've seen a man in a vest. They've seen a woman with a child in old-timey clothes. One researcher was asleep when he woke up and he saw a man in old-timey clothes carrying a body over his shoulder. Just a lot of weird stuff is seen at Harper's Ferry. And interestingly enough, the Park Service doesn't want to talk about it. I think it's part of their history. They should debunk these things if there's no truth behind them.
Well, that's on my list to do of a park to get to. What about you? As a former, a park ranger, you've probably been to so many of them. Are there any parks left on the old bucket list?
Not too many, but Isle Royale is definitely one of them in Michigan. That was the one in the book that I haven't been to. What's
so special about that one?
Well, there's Wendigo stories there, but one of the cool things about Isle Royale is if you look at it on the map, it's an island in Lake Superior, and you look at it on the map, and then flip that map upside down, and the Wendigo will appear. And what that is the island is actually shaped like this weird flying ghost with an open mouth if you turn it upside down.
You think that's just the brain trying to form something? What do they call that? Pareidolia or something?
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. I'm a skeptic, so I'm gonna make that excuse.
Yeah. Why am I convincing the skeptic to be a skeptic right now? What's going on there? I remember in the book you wrote that you had two really big fears. The second one being that someone sees you as a ghost, and luckily that hasn't happened just yet. They've seen you as a ghost in National Park and talking to you, unless I'm talking to I guess the apparition version of you right now. I sure hope not.
Yeah, well, I'm pinching myself. I think I'm real.
Okay, good. That's okay. Well done. And then, but the first one was a reader would have to be rescued from one of the hikes that you put in the book. Did that ever happen?
Not to my knowledge. I had recently left the Park Service when I wrote that book, and after all those body recoveries I told you about, I was really nervous. I didn't want to be sending people out on these hikes and have them get hurt. So fortunately, as far as I know, that hasn't happened.
Or they never came back, and either way, you're in the clear, right? So you're good there.
Yeah, I haven't had to write about their ghosts yet.
Okay, well, like we said, we'll add that to the sequel.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, though, this is our second interview. We're doing haunted hikes. Last year, we did your most recent one, which was Ranger Confidential. Definitely one of my favorite books of last year. Really, just a fascinating look into being a ranger and some of the things that you don't really know about. But what about a third? I know that you're doing a one about disappearances, you said, but is there a third book within the national parks theme?
No, but I am working with some people who want to create a podcast inspired by Ranger Confidential. So hopefully, with any luck, that'll be something you can listen to one day.
Oh, that would be phenomenal. I would totally listen to that. And I hope that you'd be the host of that. Oh man, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, believe it or not, they want me to be the host.
Hey, well, you know what? They heard you on this interview last year on this little show called The Mind's Eye, and they're like, well, we got to get her, obviously.
Hey, that might have been it.
Who cares about the host? We need her. That's what. Well, that's good to hear, because I think that would be just a fantastic listen, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, if something bad happens to you at Harper's Ferry, we can have you on as a guest.
Okay, well, I may not make it back, depending on the hike. Is that a 4-icon one? What is that? 3 icons?
Oh, I don't know. I'll have to look and see. But I think, if you spend the night in one of those historic buildings, that would be a 4-icon for sure.
Okay, yeah, definitely already peeing in my pants. I think it'll be a day visit. But what about the disappearance book? When can we expect that one out?
That's going to take me at least a year. There's been so many twists and turns, and people have been working so hard. I still have some traveling to do. It's going to be great. You're going to love it, but it's going to take me longer to get it written.
Fair enough. And speaking of trilogy, we'll have to make that the third interview in our little set of conversations. So.
For sure.
And like last year, I'm going to hold you to that one too. So
you bet, no problem.
But wherever you're located, listeners-wise, Haunted Hikes really does have something for you, near you, whether it's a well-known park or a bit of a hidden gem. It really is probably the most comprehensive paranormal book about the national parks. Andrea Lankford, I really can't thank you enough for the second round and some of your time and energy here.
You bet, Brian. Happy Halloween.
We'll talk when the next one comes around, and until then, enjoy your Halloween. This is The Mind's Eye. The wrap-up will be right back after this quick stop. And come on now, after listening to Andrea Lankford for just a little bit, you can't help but think maybe, just maybe we really aren't alone. And that does take many sentiments, as we expressed earlier, but we're going to keep that same mood and frame of mind, carry that into next week with author Kevin McQueen talking about his books, Weird Wild West, Haunted California, and Strange Tales from the South. You heard right, we're still trotting across the scary states. Join us next week. Until then, be well and let well be. I'm your host, DJ BJ Turnov, signing off for The Mind's Eye on Stitcher Radio and Z Talk Radio.